and we are ready to begin. Dan, welcome.
All right. Hey, thanks, John. And thanks, everyone, for joining me this afternoon. I'm looking forward to spending some time and hopefully learning from you a little bit about leadership in the Catholic Church, which, as John just said, has been my passion for a long time. I'm a social worker by background. I was director of Catholic Charities here in Davenport for 20 years. And my interest in leadership really developed out of my concern for social change. And my first instincts when I was a young social activist was to try to lead the change I wanted to see. And as I grew up, I began to realize that the real work, especially in the church, was about developing leaders, developing the leadership in our church. And so that's really been my focus for really the last 30 or 40 years of my ministry. Why don't we begin with prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we give you this day, and we give you this next hour and a half. So help us to be totally devoted to you, and may all the work that we do in this hour and a half help us to develop a closer relationship to you and a greater bond with each other, and a new sense of mission for our church, which desperately needs some of the change that we're going to talk about. Lord, send us your Holy Spirit to guide us and strengthen us, and to challenge us to think anew about ways that we can be church to each other and ways that we can build community in our parishes across the country. And help us to be your hands and your feet as we reach out to all those in need, the homeless, the poor, the sick, the lonely, all those who are in need of your loving care. And may we be those arms and legs to reach out and be your hands and feet to those in need. So be with us, Lord, as we try to grow in our relationship with you and with each other. And yes, please do send your Holy Spirit to guide us and strengthen us, inspire us. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so I'm going to share some slides that, as John said, these slides will be available to you. All right, let's see, is that the right one? All right, so here we go. The church and the world, desperately need change and a new model for leading change. So I'm starting out with this premise that both the church and the world need some kind of change. And really the way the change happens in our world is through leadership. So John, I'm going to ask people to be able to turn their microphones on here for a moment and just interact with me here for a moment as I play this little word game, so word association game, where I say leadership. If just you could just share a word or a phrase that comes to mind that you associate with leadership? What comes to mind? I say leadership. What do you say?
Servant.
Servant. Okay.
Teacher.
Teacher.
Example setter.
Example setter. Okay, like a role model.
Empowerer.
Empowerer. Okay, someone who empowers
Leader,
us.
yes.
Others, I say leadership. What do you say? What comes to mind?
Knowledgeable.
A little louder.
Knowledgeable.
Knowledgeable. Okay, I have to be knowledgeable to lead.
Listening.
Listening. Okay, we're going to work on that skill today.
Teamwork.
One more time.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. I thought that's what you said. Okay, yeah. So absolutely have to work in teams, build relationships and trust to work in teams.
Motivated.
Motivated. Okay, yeah. And we can intrinsically or extrinsically motivate people, right? So mostly in leadership, we're trying to inspire people or intrinsically motivate them.
Visionary.
Visionary. Okay, so vision
Ooh.
is a big part of leadership, having a picture of success. Where are we going in the future? What's our direction as a parish?
I was just gonna say inspiring.
Inspiring. Yeah, the word literally means from within the spirit, that we lift up people's spirits as a leader. Okay, that's a good start. Thank you. I appreciate that. It gives me an idea as to where you're all coming from. This is my definition of leadership after having studied and taught this for many years. And it's just the part that's in yellow here. It's a voluntary, interactive process that intends adaptive change. Every word in that definition is really important to me. So voluntary means that, if you're forcing people into the relationship or bullying people to get what you want, that's not leadership. Interactive means that the communication has to go in multiple directions. It can't just be all top down or all bottom up. It's, we're communicating in multiple ways. It's a process, not a person. Okay, that's important to me, that we don't think of leadership as just being a person. We think of it as a process or an activity that anyone can participate in. Intends, meaning that, you don't have to necessarily see the change in your lifetime or in your ministry, but this is something you're striving toward. Adaptive, we're going to talk about a lot today. What is adaptive change? And change. If you're not changing something, you're not leading. Okay. If you're working, for let's say for security, order, structure in an organization, those are all important values as well. But that would be management in my estimation or my definition, not leadership. So what we mean by adaptive change, just as a sort of a starting point here, is that you're changing hearts and minds. Okay, so it's not a technical fix. It's not changing a rule. When we think about all the ways that legislative bodies make changes, or we talk about them making changes in immigration or abortion or any other legislation we can think of, generally they're changing rules or policies. And what we're talking about in adaptive leadership is where we really change people's hearts and change their minds. Okay, and I would say that's the real work of leadership. Such as, for example, how do we as a church move from a maintenance mentality to a mission mentality? Okay, and we're going to talk more about that as we go along. Yeah, and then servant leadership. So one of you mentioned that right away. These are 4 of my books that get into servant leadership to a certain extent. Robert Greenleaf, the AT&T executive who coined the phrase, says that servant leadership is about first being motivated. There's that word motivation. Motivated first to serve. So the idea in servant leadership is that the motivation first comes from the heart, right? So that you're motivated because you want to serve others, or you want to serve a mission, you want to serve God, you want to serve the church, and then because of that motivation to serve, you see something that needs to change, and you begin to lead change. Okay, that would be the second half of servant leadership. Is so you're serving and you're leading at the same time. And as Greenleaf points out, the ultimate test of whether your leadership is really servant leadership is really on the effect it's having on the followers, right? So are the followers, are those being served and led by you, are they becoming healthier? Are they becoming wiser? Are they becoming freer to do the work and the ministry that they think they need to be doing? And are they becoming more likely to become servant leaders themselves, right? So charismatic leadership, for example, would be something different. Charismatic leadership, by definition, is more about the person who's trying to lead. And so a charismatic person is more about the attention being on them and the leadership coming from them. Whereas in servant leadership, it's really about trying to launch the leadership of other people. So what does Jesus say about all this, right? Well, lots of things. One of my favorite Jesus stories is where James and John come to him. In one of the versions, I think it's Luke, it's the mother of James and John comes to Jesus and says that they want James and John to be on Jesus' right hand and his left when he comes in glory. And Jesus doesn't tell them, hey, this is the wrong instinct to want to be out front or to be first. That's not the wrong, that's not a bad instinct. But if you want to be first, Jesus says, then be first as the greatest servant, right? So what he's doing is really transforming our concept of leadership here. And he says directly, he says, you know, the rulers of the Gentiles, he's talking about the Romans, right? And how they lorded over them. Have you ever felt lorded over? Okay. Micromanaged, where someone is just watching you. You have a boss who watches over everything you do. That's being lorded over. And Jesus is saying, no, don't lord over them. Not so with you. Not so in my church. That's not the style of leadership I'm looking for. He's saying whoever wants to be great, whoever wants to lead, must be your servant. Okay, and Jesus he comes back to that same lesson during the Last Supper. This, by the way, is a picture of me kneeling in the upper room in Jerusalem, or the room that they think is the upper room where Jesus and the apostles had the Last Supper, right? So there's this Last Supper reminder, because again, even after 3 years of being trained by the best leadership trainer of all time, the apostles have this debate among themselves of which one of them is the greatest. Okay, it also happens in Mark 9, you know, and Jesus says in Mark 9, you know, when they're arguing about which one of them is the greatest, and he says, well, whoever wants to be the greatest, or you want to be the first, you must be the servant of all. Okay, and he reminds them of that at the Last Supper again. And it's kind of interesting to me that, you know, it just shows the humanity of the apostles and the humanity of all of us, that our instincts are we want to be great. We want to be first. We want to be recognized. And Jesus says, okay, those aren't necessarily bad instincts, but if you want to be recognized as the greatest or as first, then be the greatest servant. Okay, so he just sort of changes the paradigm of thinking about this. All right, so Pope Francis said one time that if you really want to know about leadership, he said, this was early in his ministry, he said, read the Beatitudes. Okay, well, I happen to have a book on leadership in the Beatitudes. It's called Blessings for Leaders. It's by far and away the best-selling of my 5 books. And I don't think it has anything to do with me. It has everything to do with the Beatitudes. You know, just the wisdom that comes from these 8 sayings that launched the Sermon on the Mount. And you know that you know, the Beatitudes are really the core of Jesus' teaching, right? The Sermon on the Mount, it's 3 chapters where Jesus is preaching, okay, uninterrupted by narrative or by stories in Matthew's gospel. Matthew's 5, 6, and 7 is just the Sermon on the Mount. And the first 8 lines of that Sermon on the Mount are what we call the Beatitudes, or, you know, in English, we would call them the blessings, okay? And so what I want to do is, this is going to be our first breakout. John's going to break you into groups of 4 or 5, and I'm going to ask you in your small groups to select 1 or 2 Beatitudes to talk about, and we're going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes. And I got 2 questions for you in those Beatitudes, about the Beatitude that you select in your small group. The first question really is, how is this Beatitude speaking to you? What is it saying to you? And then the second question is, what might this Beatitude say about leadership? Okay, leadership, particularly in the church. And one way to think about each of the Beatitudes is I have a virtue assigned to each Beatitude here. So the virtue that I assign to blessed are the poor in spirit is wisdom. Okay, so if you're answering the question about how does this particular Beatitude speak to you when you're in your small group, talk about what does wisdom have to do with leadership, right? So wisdom is the virtue I've associated with the first Beatitude. And then the second, and you're going to have to remember these Beatitudes, okay, and select one that you want to speak about in your small group that you're going to be randomly assigned into in a few moments. Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Okay, and this obviously has a lot to do with empathy. How can we become more empathetic as leaders? And what does empathy have to do with leadership would be part of your question if you chose the second Beatitude. The third Beatitude, blessed are the meek, okay, for they shall inherit the earth. And obviously the virtue assigned to meekness is humility. How can we become humble in our leadership style? The fourth Beatitude, blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. The virtue associated here is justice. And how can we be fair and balanced and just in our leadership? And how is that important to the activity of leadership? Blessed are the merciful. This is the fifth beatitude. For they will be shown mercy. Obviously, the virtue here is mercy. Pure of heart. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. So you might ask yourself, why would the pure of heart see God? Okay, and the virtue associated here is service. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Why would peacemakers be called children of God? Might be something to ponder if you select this beatitude. And obviously the virtue here is peace. And then the final beatitude, which, by the way, the ending of this beatitude ends the way the first beatitude does, right? So you might notice that I like to think of the first half of the beatitude as like a mission statement, and the second half of the beatitude is like a vision statement. And the vision of Jesus in Matthew's gospel clearly is the kingdom of heaven, right? And so the eighth beatitude, blessed are they persecuted for the sake of righteousness. What does that have to do with leadership? And the virtue assigned here is courage. All right. So I'm going to ask you for about 7 or 8 minutes to get into small groups, randomly assigned, have someone facilitate, make sure everyone introduces themselves, and then pick a beatitude and maybe two, and talk about it. These two questions. How's the beatitude speaking to you this morning? And what might it have to do with leadership? And then I'm going to go through the 8 beatitudes when we come back and ask someone to share their thoughts about that beatitude based on what they talked about in their small groups. So, John, I want to send everybody to their small groups, please.
We are all set.
Okay. All right, so welcome back from your conversations about the Beatitudes. So what I'd like to do now is kind of go through the Beatitudes one by one. I'll put them back up on the screen so you can remember what they are. Let's see. All right, so let's go to blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So who did some talking about this one? Who'd like to share some of your thoughts about blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven? What does it mean, and what does it have to do with leadership? Okay, not everybody at once. Just have to unmute yourself and share some of your thoughts about this particular beatitude. All right, well, hearing none, I'll share my thoughts. So first of all, when I first heard this phrase, poor in spirit, and I went to grade school, elementary, high school, college, and I always thought that poor in spirit meant that something was wrong with your spirituality. Like, you just weren't very good at praying or weren't very good at going to mass. And actually, this beatitude means exactly the opposite of that, right? So what it means is that the poor in spirit are ones who recognize just how desperately they need God in their lives. They realize that they need to surrender their will and their entire being to God. And that's what it means to be poor in spirit. The rich in spirit were the people who thought they had all the answers. The scribes and the Pharisees, right? They were the rich in spirit in the time of Jesus. They were the ones who thought that they had it all figured out. And they just had to follow the rules and they were going to be saved, right? So Jesus is saying that the poor in spirit will reach the kingdom of heaven. And I think there's a certain amount of wisdom to that, and that applies to leadership, because I think one of the first steps to leadership is realizing that you don't have all the answers and that you need other people. And if you're trying to change something by yourself, that's not leadership. By definition, leadership has to involve other people. If you're doing something by yourself, some things, maybe that's okay, but it's not leadership, right? Leadership is a collective activity that involves other people. All right, let's go to blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And let's see, my slides are not moving right now, so I'm going to share. Who'd like to speak to this particular one? Blessed are they who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
In our group, we talked a little bit about how mourn doesn't mean like the loss of a loved one all the time. Like we sometimes think that word means death. but it can mean a lot of different things. And like my personal situation in my ministry is we have a new structure in place with leadership, and sort of how we've had to navigate through the transition of a new structure means kind of mourning what we had that we know wasn't working, but change is hard. And so how we've navigated that together, and really trying to empathize with one another, with our pastors, with our parishioners, how that how that's affected me as a minister and the people that I work with and serve. So it's been an interesting challenge.
Yeah, thanks. I think there was a lot of mourning in the time of Jesus, right? I mean, you're talking about people who were under Roman occupation. We're talking about people, a time and a place where there weren't hospitals and doctors, and now you have this person of Jesus who's healing the sick and comforting those who mourn. So I can see how Jesus is speaking to his audience here. Blessed are they who mourn. And the empathy in leadership, as you just said, yes. If you can't identify with what you're asking people to go through in a change process, well, then you're not much of a leader, because I think to really lead people, you need to understand where they're coming from as well, right? So being able to empathize with your followers. All right, let's go to blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Who'd like to speak to this beatitude? All right, well, hearing none, I'll go ahead and speak to it. So first of all, I would suggest that the word meek is misunderstood by most people. It's just like poor in spirit was. Meek is oftentimes associated with the word weak, right? We think of meek people as being weak and passive, or worse yet, we think of it as being people who are introverted. Okay, and we could talk about that. That's another whole topic. But this is not about being introverted or being weak. This is about being humble, right? And the word humble comes from the same word as the word human, which basically means down to earth. Okay, the word human means someone from the earth. And to be meek, they talk about meekness inheriting the earth, because the word meek in the time of Jesus was used to describe farmers, farm animals, people who worked the earth, worked the land. So it made sense that they would inherit the earth. And humility is about being down to earth. It's about being grounded in the reality of your strengths and your weaknesses, knowing your gifts and talents, and know where you need other people. And there's tons of research that connects humility to leadership, showing that, if you think you've got all the answers, okay, you're in trouble, because in today's world, you need other people to figure out the best answers to our most complex problems, like adaptive challenges. All right, let's go to the next one. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Would anyone like to speak to this beatitude?
I think for me that I connected hunger and justice, and I think that charity is giving something to a problem maybe you see, but I think really justice is getting to the root of the problem and trying to fix it. And I think there's a lot of satisfaction for me in my first year in that I'm doing a lot of research and I'm finding answers, but I constantly have to challenge myself that finding answers is not about checking off a box on a list, but finding the solutions that people need so they can actively be a part of the parish wherever they are in their stage.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for talking about the difference between charity and justice, that charity is more direct service, and justice is about bringing about change, getting at the core, the root of a problem, right? And the word righteousness, I struggled mightily with this word when I was writing the book on the Beatitudes. And, what does this word mean? And I was sitting in church one day, and during the offertory prayer, when we say, it is right and just, I just started pondering, why do we say both right and just if those words mean almost the same thing? And as I reflected on it further, I realized that, I think being right means, in this context, means being right with God, and being just means being just with the people. And when you take right and just together, I think that's what Jesus is talking about with the righteous. And as you just said, yeah, so being just in your leadership, so important to be fair with people and to be able to get at the causes of some of our adaptive problems. We're going to talk more about that. Great, thank you for sharing. Blessed are the merciful, the fifth beatitude, for they will be shown mercy. Does anyone want to speak to this? Or speak to why is mercy important to the activity of leadership? Anyone want to speak to the fifth beatitude?
I think with mercy, it would be important to be able to recognize other people's limitations and not place more than they can handle on them.
Mhm. Very well said. Yeah, yeah. So I think of it that same way. That, you know, the idea of a merciful leader is someone who gives people the benefit of the doubt when there's conflict, who, like you said, you know, doesn't give people too much that they can't handle. Being, you know, so being merciful, particularly when you're leading adaptive change, where, leading change, let's face it, it's not easy, it's risky, and it causes conflict. And sometimes when you try new things or you're trying to be innovative, creative as a leader, we're going to make mistakes. And so I think you have to be merciful. If people are going to try new things, then the people in positions of authority have to be merciful, or people aren't going to try anything new, right? So if I go out on a limb and things don't go very well, and then everybody blames me for going out on that limb, well, I'm not going to go out on a limb again, right? So being merciful, giving people the benefit of the doubt, really important to leadership. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Who'd like to speak to the sixth beatitude? So why would the pure of heart see God? And what does purity of heart have to do with leadership?
My group's about to be shocked. I had some audio issues, but and this isn't one that we talked about, but in being pure of heart with your service, it's what is good for all, or in a singular situation, what is best for the person that's sitting across from you. To me, that's
exactly. Yeah, what's in the best interest of others, right? So putting the needs and interests of other people, or putting the needs and interests of the parish, putting the needs and interests of the church ahead of your own. That's all about purity of heart, you know, purifying your intentions. Purity of heart means, you know, that your intentions are pure, that, you know, you really have the best intentions of the group, the best intentions of the church. That's what service is all about, right? And it's interesting that neuroscientists are beginning to recognize that this type of unselfish behavior actually does generate from the heart, the physical heart, right? So neuroscientists can measure what's happening in our physical heart and notice that when we're acting in unselfish ways, that we're actually engaging the neurological connections between the head and the heart. Okay, so that service literally does come from the heart. So purity of heart, how can we purify our intentions? Blessed are the peacemakers. So the seventh beatitude, peacemakers will be called children of God. Why do you think peacemakers will be called children of God? And what does this particular beatitude speak to you?
So in my group, we related both peacemakers to the last beatitude, being persecuted. And so there was concern about being persecuted, but at the same time, we all are called to be peacemakers. And in that process of being a peacemaker, we have to take courage. And living and working, ministering in a divided church, a divided society, polarized. We have, as leaders, we have to take courage to be peacemakers. But at the same time, we were thinking that perhaps we are the worst persecutors of ourselves, our ideas, or our worries, our concerns. So we may find ourselves at war within, and frightened with the idea of being persecuted, but at the same time, we have to take courage. And as leaders, we need to be, we need to take the middle ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like the way you combined the seventh and eighth beatitude. I think all these beatitudes are connected in various ways, right?
Yes.
And what you're talking about as far as divisions, polarization in the church, it's time for us to be bold and clear, right, about our message as Christians, as disciples of Christ. And I would suggest that as we recognize our common humanity, as we recognize our common discipleship in Christ, as we recognize that we're all children of God, I think that's the key to being a peacemaker. Is I think peacemakers are people who recognize that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and and so we need to address our conflict directly. Especially, when we distinguish in my conflict class, we distinguish between task conflict and relationship conflict. So task conflict is where you and I have a difference of opinion about how to solve a problem. Relationship conflict is where we start attacking each other because we have a difference of opinion, right? So task conflict is healthy for teams and organizations. We need a diversity of perspectives to be able to address our most complex issues, like, how are we going to grow the church in this secular age? That's an adaptive challenge. That's a complex question. It's not something that is going to have an easy technical fix to it, right? So as we address those kind of questions, we need to, recognize that division or, diverse opinions is good, but when we start attacking each other because we have different perspectives, then that's not so good, right? That relationship conflict in any amounts is not healthy for teams or organizations, even in the church. And so, I think a lot of times as church people, we think, well, we don't have conflict, right? I mean, we're Christians. We're all Christians here. We're not going to have conflict. No, Jesus is saying here, blessed are the peacemakers. They recognize that we're all children of God. Okay, so, and then finally, blessed are they persecuted for the sake of righteousness. So the same word we had in the fourth beatitude, righteousness, appears again in the eighth beatitude. And then the eighth beatitude ends the way the first beatitude ends, with that vision of Jesus as the kingdom of heaven. So would anyone else like to speak to this eighth beatitude? All right. Well, I would just suggest that as you're living and leading by these beatitudes, you're going to get resistance. You're going to get criticism. Not everybody's going to be on board when you decide you want to change something. I know a lot of people in parishes that, for example, are struggling with how do we, move more toward the domestic church, and and sometimes the moves that catechetical leaders are making in parishes are not all that popular, and so doing things to encourage parents to show up and stay on religious ed night might not be such a popular thing for parents. You might get criticized for it, right? People are going to resist change in all kinds of ways. And what this beatitude is saying is fear not, have courage, right? In fact, that message of fear not, be not afraid, some theologians counted it all up and said there's 365 places in the Bible where the Bible says, be not afraid. So one for each day of the year. We have to constantly be reminded to have courage, particularly when you're living and leading by these beatitudes. All right. So anything else on the beatitudes before I'm gonna begin to move toward another part of my presentation here?
Yeah, I just wanted to share something from our group.
Okay, please.
About peacemakers, and it kind of goes along with that last one as well about courage. When someone in our group brought up the difficult situation at a school where people can be very territorial, and I think we all have experienced that in ministry in different ways. And so being a peacemaker in that situation also implies the courage to repair relationships and bringing people to see a greater vision and work for the greater good than maybe a smaller vision or their personal good. So we talked a lot about how being a peacemaker is also about being unifying and uniting as best as we can. So I just want to offer
Yeah,
that.
very well said. I'm just actually working with a Catholic school right now that's has a lot of turmoil, and we're setting up listening sessions so people can, you know, address the conflict directly. Because I would suggest that everything you just said is true, and that the first step toward resolving some of these differences is to listen, right? This whole emphasis of Pope Francis on synodal listening comes into play here, that we need to be able to just listen to each other, right? And I would suggest that's really one of the most important activities of leadership, one of the most important skills in leading or in teaching for that matter, right? So I'm a teacher as well. I have to listen to my students. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so my dissertation research was on servant leadership in a parish. And what I found from my dissertation research were these three behaviors were the main things that I found that were, I would say, signs that servant leadership is happening in a parish. So the first thing we saw was just this recognition and appreciation for the gifts and talents and efforts of other people. Being able to have that eye toward, the charisms of other people, and then, and to recognize that and call those particular gifts and talents forward, right? The second we saw was literally serving, being pure of heart, where you putting the needs and interests of other people ahead of your own. I think of, for example, just sometimes it's just little things. Like I remember the first impression I had of one of my bishops when he was a brand new bishop in our diocese, and first time I met him was in a kitchen where he was scrubbing out pots and pans for, because at the end of a meeting before they had coffee, and he was, I think just, the fact that the bishop was doing that, that very, hands-on activity, just, brought him down to earth, so those sometimes are little things, but in the big things, it's really about, making decisions based on what's in the best interest of everyone, not just myself, so that's the serving part. And then empowering. One of you mentioned that word in our first activity, the word association game, right? So empower literally means being able to share power or build the capacity in others. That would be my definition of empowerment. I got that from I was in Africa on a Catholic Relief Services missionary trip one time, and we had some of the women in an African village talking about empowerment. We asked them, so what's your definition of empowerment? And they said, it's all about building capacity in others. And I thought, that's perfect, right? Building the capacity for others to be able to act, particularly here, to build the capacity in others to serve and to lead, which I would suggest is one of the main things that you do when you have a position of authority. So the way we define management is that it's a position of authority. And you can lead from a position of authority, but you don't have to have a position of authority to lead. So you can lead with or without authority, but management always comes with authority. So the people in authority have managerial responsibilities. And those people at the top, they can either create conditions where leadership is going to happen, or they can discourage it from happening everywhere in the parish. So leadership at the top really can make all the difference in the world in terms of whether leadership shows up elsewhere, both in the pulpit and in the pews. All right, so what's the effect of this kind of servant leadership? In my dissertation research, we found social capital grew. People trusted each other more. There was more commitment to the parish. There was more of a sense of team cohesion. There was more of a togetherness, less division, less polarization, because the leadership was acting in a servant leadership way. And then we also saw in the people what in business we call organizational citizenship. This is basically very small behaviors that you see the people or the workers in a workplace taking upon themselves. Like helping means someone didn't show up for work for a week, and someone else says, hey, I noticed you were gone from work for a week. What can I do to help you get caught up? Okay. Or participating simply means showing up for various activities in the parish, initiating, being able to, so servant leadership increases initiating. People are more likely to take the initiative and try something new, and be willing to step up and lead or to chair a committee when they see servant leadership at the top. And self-developing. When servant leadership is at the top, people are more concerned about developing their own gifts and talents and developing themselves as a leader and as a servant in the parish. So those are what we call organizational citizenship behaviors. And when you have organizational citizenship, it's really the sign of a high-performing, well-functioning team or organization. And so what the research shows is that when you have servant leadership happening in the parish or in any organization, you're going to see more social capital and you're going to see more organizational citizenship. Now, 4 direct ways that people can act as a servant leadership. One is to invite others, right? So you use your voice to invite others into, say, particular roles in the parish. Inspiring people was one of the words that came out of our word association early on, right? Literally means that the motivation comes from within the spirit. Modeling, someone mentioned this in our word association, right? So being able to use your hands and feet and role model to others what servant leadership is all about. And then affection, literally showing empathy that comes from the heart. And then at a more macro level, the organizational keys to servant leadership are, can we change the culture of our parish so that servanthood, so that service becomes a part of our culture, and culture is basically the way we do things around here. It's like the sum total of all behaviors and values and policies and procedures. It's all of that together adds up to culture. Can somehow we have a culture that really embraces servanthood? And then structures. How well are our structures set up to enhance servanthood? And then strategies. Do we have strategies in our pastoral planning? Is our parish council coming up with strategies that encourage, empower, and enable, enhance the ability of people to serve and to lead in the parish? All right. So before I move on to adaptive leadership, any questions about servant leadership? Before I'm going to transition now to adaptive leadership. Okay, and feel free to ask questions in the chat too, and John can interrupt me at some point and tell me if there's, a question needs to be answered about the content. All right, so adaptive leadership. The basic idea here is that as the world becomes more complex, organizations need to adapt. And so the question becomes, how is the world changing in ways that the church needs to adapt? And what I mean by this is not changing our tradition, not changing our teachings. That's what I mean by thinking outside the box, but inside the circle. So we want to think outside the box. If the box represents the way we usually do things around here, we want to think outside of that. But we have to, we always think about there's a circle outside the box, okay, that limits how far outside the box we can think, okay? So, and that would be like canon law, church teaching, gospel values, right? So we want to go outside the box, but stay inside the circle. So the reason why adaptive leadership is so important is because there's a historical shift that's occurred globally, okay? For decades, we were in what we call, actually centuries, we were in what we call the industrial era, where basically 80 or 90% of the people were working in factories, and they needed to be supervised, which literally means looked over. Their opinions weren't important because the boss had the answers. And leadership in the industrial era was basically, it meant good management. They were basically seen as one and the same. So the world has changed. The landscape of organizational life has changed. And we're in what we call the post-industrial era, okay? And some of the major global changes, first of all, the fact that globalization has happened, right? That, the same things that are going on here in the United States are very similar to what's happening in Europe and Asia and around the world. The complexity of our problems has changed. Things aren't as simple as, fixing something on an assembly line in the industrial era. When something broke on an assembly line, the manager knew how to fix it, didn't have to talk to the workers. Okay. Now the kind of problems we're talking about, there's no easy answers. Generational shifts, what we mean is that, you know, there's something about the younger generation. And I know all the older generations have always said that about younger people, but there are some real differences. There's some changes. And some of it is being generated by technology and the use of technology and the amount of distractions that technology puts into our life, not just for young people, but for all of us. We've also seen a historic decline of the influence of the family and the influence of religion on society itself. And this is particularly in the Western world, right? So we've seen business become the primary social institution in our world. It used to be that family and religion dictated social values, okay? And as Monsignor James Shea and many others have pointed out, we're at the end of Christendom. Christendom is no longer. You know, Christianity no longer dictates to society. We do not dictate out of Christian values how a business should be run. Business dictates to us how the church should be run. Okay? And then the pace of change itself has changed. All right? And so because of all that, we're living in a world that's more like whitewater rafting. Okay? Where change is swirling all around us, and we have to hang together on this raft. Where we're whitewater rafting in the midst of all this swirling change. We have to hold on to each other and trust each other to make quick decisions based on simple rules and core values and gospel principles, because that's the way organizations have to operate these days. Okay, that's our new reality, and we have to adapt to that new reality, just like any business or any organization. So I would suggest that the landscape has changed, and yet the church has not. Okay. And quite frankly, most businesses have not either. Most organizations have not changed. The challenges in our new world are more adaptive and less technical. And so because they're adaptive, we need more leading change and less managing change. Managing change is basically where the people in positions of authority decide what we need to change. And then those of us in the middle parts of authority, or people at the bottom, have to manage how that change is going to happen. So adaptive challenges, by their definition, are ones that require leadership. They cannot be solved by management alone, okay? And because the issues are so complex, we have to ask more of the people around us and tell less, okay? These 5 people on this picture are women that I used to supervise when I was director of Catholic Charities. They ran our immigration program. And one of the things I learned about supervising the immigration program was that they would come to me because I was the jefe, and they expected me to have the answers to their most complex problems because I was the boss. I was the person in position of authority, and I didn't have the answers. And I was like, this is back when I was in my 20s and 30s, and I thought I had to come up with some kind of an answer for them because I was the boss. I was the jefe. And in their eyes, I was supposed to have the answers. And I realized at some point that the best answer to these 5 women was to say, well, what do you think we should do about it? Because they had better ideas because they were closer to the problem, okay? So in adaptive leadership, we need to talk to the people closest to the problem, okay? And that's a change in culture. That's a change in culture. We have to change the way we think about authority because, you know, the reality is authority doesn't have all the answers like we used to. It's not like the industrial era where, you know, it was simply a matter of, you know, we're putting hubcaps on Ford wheels, and when something happened on the assembly line, I knew how to fix it. It's not like that anymore. Okay. So technical fixes can be applied when the answer is known. Okay. And if it is a technical problem, then management should be able to fix it. And most adaptive issues, I would say, have aspects that are both adaptive and technical. And most adaptive issues have to actually be led and managed for that reason. But what we tend to do is we tend to apply our technical fix and we stop there. We don't get to the adaptive part. And I would suggest that the most important and urgent issues that we face as a church tend to be more adaptive. And so we have to change the culture of the church to become less of a church where we tell people what to do and more of a church where we ask people what we need to do. So, I mean, just simply looking at evangelization, how are we going to grow the church? Okay. I don't think anyone could just tell us this is the answer and, you know, here's the fix and we apply it tomorrow and problem solved, right? Evangelization is not going to happen that way. We have to have real conversations with each other where we ask each other what can be done. All right. So with adaptive leadership, like servant leadership, the bottom line is that leadership is an activity. It's not a position. It's not a title. You can't be promoted into leadership. Okay. Leadership's an activity that you choose. It's a choice. When you choose to enter into a voluntary, interactive process that intends adaptive change, that's when you know you're leading. Okay. That's the only way you know you're leading. So what are some examples of adaptive challenges that I'm talking about? Okay, so one would be engagement, lay engagement. How do we engage lay people in today's world? We know that even our Knights of Columbus, our altars and rosary society, have fewer people involved in them. We know that it's harder to find catechetical teachers, right? It's harder to find religious ed teachers. It's harder to find youth ministers. How do we engage people in the parish, in the important life of the church? That's an adaptive challenge, okay? How do we change our mindset from maintenance to mission, right? So, you know, in the apostolic era, we could just say, okay, we're just going to maintain things the way they are. We maintain our schools, maintain our parishes, and things were fine. It was like that for hundreds of years. It's not working anymore, folks. Back in the day, you could just get everybody to go to mass by saying, if you don't go to mass, you're going to go to hell. Okay. That was a technical fix, right? That's a rule that got people to go to church, and it worked for hundreds of years. It doesn't work anymore. Okay. We have to get on mission. And the mission of the church is the Great Commission, my opinion. Okay. The mission of the church is what Jesus commissioned to us. Go make disciples. Okay. That's our mission, the way I see it. And generational shifts. We all know that it's harder to reach young people and young adults than it was before. So those are adaptive challenges in the world today. And I would suggest that the way we get at these adaptive challenges, whether it's in the church or a business or any organization, is through dialogue. Okay. And the research shows that dialogue is a two-way exchange that opens up new opportunities to look at our adaptive challenges in new ways with a new perspective and to start looking at new solutions that we never thought about before. We also know that dialogue increases the engagement of the people who are actively engaged in the dialogue. Okay, so it builds trust, it builds relationship. So dialogical leadership is moving away from just telling people what to do, commanding and controlling, which the research clearly shows only gets you to compliance. So yeah, for hundreds of years, our churches were full with people going to mass, but were they really practicing discipleship? Were they really actively engaged in a relationship with Christ? Okay, maybe not so much as we think, right? And so I would suggest that as we move toward this different style of leadership that invites and influences and engages people, inspires them, you're going to get more collaboration, right? And collaboration is built on trust. Okay, research clearly shows this. The more you trust, the more you collaborate. And the more you collaborate, the more you trust. All right, so this book, Humble Inquiry, suggests a way of having these conversations about adaptive challenges. All right, and so what we're going to do momentarily is John's going to put you into breakout rooms with one other person. And I'm going to ask you to have a humble conversation with that one other person. All right. And I'm going to demonstrate it by asking Lisa. Lisa, are you still there? Let me stop sharing here for a moment.
I'm still here.
All right, Lisa. Lisa has volunteered to be the person I'm going to have a humble conversation with. All right. So, but before we go into the humble conversation, does anybody have any questions? Or John, is there any questions in the chat room about material that I've covered since the last time I paused?
No questions in the chat.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm gonna try to demonstrate as best as I can on Zoom a humble conversation with Lisa. Okay. And I'd like you to just basically pay attention to what am I doing as the person who's trying to hold this humble conversation. Okay.
My camera is just disabled. Sorry.
Are you ready, Lisa?
Yes, my camera is just disabled, but I'm here.
Okay. All right. So Lisa, thank you for participating in this conversation. I really appreciate you stepping up and volunteering. So can you tell me a little bit about your ministry in New Paltz, New York?
Yes, so we have a church in New Paltz, New York. We run a ton of programs where we do try to get families very involved. So we have religious education programs. I am a religious education for 7th and 8th graders in their confirmation preparation. But we also hold a lot of events like picnics and Mardi Gras parties and things that really invite the whole family unit to come together and talk about their faith and also have fun and make connections, outside of the actual church setting.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like there's a lot of things going on in your parish to try to engage people, to try to get them to come together as a community, as a parish community. So your focus is on the 7th and 8th graders.
Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how do you engage the parents of 7th and 8th graders?
So one is by, like I said, hosting some events. We'll actually have with our kids and their parents, but also siblings and aunts and uncles. If we have events to either get ready for confirmation or even holiday events, we always try to open it up to the family too, just kind of as a reminder that faith begins at home. And so just to remind everybody why we're doing this and the importance of each event.
Okay. All right. So you're bringing people together, especially around special events. Sounds like they're kind of some social gatherings. But okay, so you ended that statement by saying you want to remind people why that's important. So tell me, why is that important? Why is it important to involve parents?
I think it's important because I think it's a real challenge for parents these days. We always talk every class really about social media and outside influences, and you're always going to have all of these different moral compasses thrown at you that might not align to what we're teaching you. And so the importance in family involvement is kind of just to make sure that everybody remembers the goals of this and following our faith formation and the morality behind it, and really how to implement that in the home life. So it's not just say your Hail Marys. It's how might you react in a certain situation, or what might you do with an online bully, or how do you react in a way that would reflect our beliefs? And the family should be really involved in that, because I think it's a topic that really affects them as well.
So it sounds like in addition to the social activities, you're also trying to train the parents to a certain extent to become more actively involved in the faith formation of their kids. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think in sometimes you almost see where, like you said, go to church or you'll go to health. Sometimes it's just, well, I went to religious education, I'll send my kids to religious education. And it's really to build the faith formation for everybody to, not just as a habit, but really understanding what's behind it.
Okay. So it sounds like you're doing some teaching to the parents to help them understand what discipleship is all about, and why faith formation is so important for their kids. Can you draw me a picture of what that might look like when you're teaching parents, like for example, how to handle bullies? It was one of the examples you used. How would that work? How would you address a topic like that with the parents?
So we actually start it in two ways. So we'll have parents and children together when we first start, and kind of go over what we're going to do. And then the kids will break off into one section and talk about it from their perspective. And then for parents, we might talk about like, what are certain things that you're seeing that your child might be going through. So if your child has a situation with a bully, or, you know, even just social media in total, things to remember, that like your morality really does matter. So how you respond, should you respond in a hateful way? Should you respond by getting help from an adult, or blocking this person? Or what are ways that you can stay within our faith that would allow you to respond like properly, I guess. And it really, we have the parents ask us questions, we ask them questions. Sometimes they teach us. So,
Okay, yeah.
you know, so
Well,
we
thank
try to
you.
make it interactive.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. We could easily talk about this for another half hour. I don't have that kind of time, but it sounds like as if what you're doing is you're bringing the whole family unit together, and then you break into the 7th and 8th graders, go into their classroom, and you do something with the parents, and you're addressing various topics that would be of interest to the parents. And you're doing it, it sounds like, in a very interactive way, where they're asking questions and you're relating to them. So I would suggest, yeah, this is one of the ways that some of the churches in my area are moving as well. So thanks for participating in this short version of a humble conversation, Lisa. I'd like
You're
to
very
open this
welcome.
up to so I'd like to open this up to the rest of the people on the call. And if you could just feedback to me, what was I doing in this conversation? What did you see me doing in this humble conversation?
I'm really wanting to get to know the person and what they do, and really interested in what is their thinking process and their motivation. It really was, yeah, focused on them and their work.
Okay, so thanks, Anna. So I was showing interest in Lisa's work. I was really trying to understand her. Erin, what would you add?
I was going to say, you asked follow-up questions based on the things that she said specifically. So you weren't just like, oh, tell me more about that. You were like, you said that you work with 7th and 8th graders, and then you asked a specific question about 7th and 8th graders, not just like, tell me more about that in a vague way.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. That was a really good pickup. So in humble conversations, you're trying to stay inside the conversation. So you're summarizing what the other person said, and then you're staying within the context of something they just brought up. Okay, and I see someone saying, yes, that I listened actively. So how do you know I was listening?
You repeated back what she said. You confirmed, did I understand that correctly, or was that right? So you were kind of verifying if you understood what she shared with you.
Yeah.
It was also your body language, and if the person had been sitting there, you would have been looking right at them.
Yeah, and I wish that were the case. Yeah. So yeah, you're looking. So yeah, facial expressions, body posture, all of this matters in these humble conversations, right? And listening involves summarizing. Summarizing does two things. First of all, it demonstrates that you are paying attention. Secondly, it gives the other person a chance to clarify if you got something wrong.
I also liked how you created a trusting space. It was a safe space for her to share what it is that she does. There's nothing, no accusatory or, it was just very peaceful, and that you led her into being able to talk with you, share with you what it is that she's doing. It was lovely.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And there's a piece of that we would call appreciative inquiry, right? So you're, trying to maintain that positive attitude, positive mentality, really bringing out the gifts and talents of the other person. And, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Lisa. Good. I know we're kind of short on time, but I want to give you a chance to practice this a little bit. And so I'm going to ask John to put you into breakout rooms. And now when you do this practice, and you're not going to be able to do it for very long, but about 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes each direction. What I want you to do is make sure that you're not just having a chit chat that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I want you, for example, that, Lissa is telling her story to Aaron. Aaron's asking the questions and summarizing and listening. And then after we say change directions, Aaron is listening to Lissa. And so at that point, it's Lissa's turn to tell her story, and Aaron is asking questions and listening. Okay. So let's give this a first try. And next week, we're going to go much deeper into these humble conversations. We're going to break it open, both the art and the science of it, and give you even more time to practice it. But let's get a taste of it right now. John, if you could put everyone into, we got 37 people. So let's do 18 breakout rooms, and the one leftover person can talk to me.
Got it.
Thank you.
All the rooms are open.
Hey, great. All right, welcome back, everyone. I'd like to wrap this up by hearing a little bit from you about this very, very short experience you had with humble inquiry. So you're getting a taste of it right now, and let me reassure you, I'll have a lot more time for this in the hour and a half that we'll have next week, where we're going to go much deeper into the whole concept of listening and the idea of asking open-ended questions, as well as other conversational skills. We'll also talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, which I think is at the really at the core of what we call conversational intelligence. And yeah, so let me just open this up to your comments or questions you might have. How did this very quick first taste you had with these humble conversations, how did it go?
I'd say let's do that again.
Okay. All right. So you enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it, and it gave me insight into, if I have a meeting with someone, I usually have an agenda, and I may not listen to them like I should. So I need to put part of that aside, and I need to schedule enough time to delve in and maybe leave my office with them. That was some eye openers, as just given this time, it's protected. People know I'm on a webinar, so I shut my door. But yeah, I think protecting those humble inquiries a little better.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Those are 3 very good takeaways and things that we're going to go into much deeper next week. All 3 of the things that you just said. So we'll definitely be sharing. What's the usefulness of these kind of conversations? How do you set them up? Where do you have them? What kind of topics do you cover? How do you make sure you're listening and you allow enough time? Those are very good takeaways. Others, your thoughts about this?
Well, I would say you certainly actually learn more with your active listening. And when you're active listening, then of course it turns around to better quality questions. And then it's cyclical, right? Your active listening makes you learn more, gives you better quality questions, makes you learn more, etc. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting way to put it, Jane. That it's almost like it's reciprocal, that the more we ask open questions, the more we actually learn from the process. And the more we learn from the process, the more we're going to ask yet another open question and another open question. And what we find, in most conversations is that we enter into the conversation already, as Tanya was saying, with an agenda, right? And we listen from that biased perspective, as opposed to listening with eyes and ears and a mind that's open to what the other person can teach us. Anyone else have things you'd like to share? Yes, please.
And not to sound cheesy, but it's really rewarding when you are actively listening. Like someone had said earlier, is that they can teach you a lot of things. And it's not just about, I don't know, the world, but just even emotionally, you can learn so much from people when you're just actively listening and have that one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, exactly, Patty. And that's why, so I started out this presentation by talking about these conversational skills in the context of adaptive leadership, because it's the ways in which the world has changed that's required us to lead differently. And part of that new approach to leadership has to be more dialogical, because the problems that we face as a church are so monumental that there's no way that one person is going to figure out how to solve it and can solve it all on their own. So we have to figure out a way to lead people toward this change. And a big part of that is these conversational skills of being able to listen, ask an open question, and learn from the conversations that we can have, so that, you know, now we're actually learning from the people who, as we like to say in adaptive leadership, the people closest to the problem. So learning from our parents, learning from our kids, you know, learning from each other, learning from our pastor, you know, being able to learn from whoever it is that we're having our one-on-one conversations with. So I think we're out of time, and I just, I look forward to spending another 90 minutes with you next Thursday, where we'll go much deeper into all of this. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.